good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today for our Recruiter Roundup from the Frontlines panel. My name is Nina. I'm an Associate Marketing Manager over at Glassdoor, and I will be one of your moderators for the day. So before we get started, special thank you to BambooHR for partnering with us on this webcast. You've been a great partner to us, and we absolutely love doing these kind of events with you. So a couple of webinar tips for attendees before we get started as well. All lines will be muted to avoid background noise, but you can ask questions at any time by typing them into the Q&A panel that you see on your left-hand side. To be mindful of everybody's time, we will address all questions from the audience at the end of the presentation, but if one of our panelists says something amazing and you have a question immediately, feel free to ask it whenever you may have that. I'd also like to invite you all to join the conversation with us socially, as we will be live tweeting throughout the webinar using the hashtag #RecruiterRoundup. So without further ado, I will pass it off to our amazing moderator for the day, Erica Perkins, who will kick it off for us. Erica, over to you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Perkins, and I'm going to be moderating today. I'm the Director HR Business Partners at Glassdoor. Prior to Glassdoor, my background includes recruiting for niche and hard-to-find talent in computer animation and the cybersecurity industries. Personally, I feel very passionate about talent and the employee experience, which starts with the candidate experience. So I'm excited about this conversation today with our panelists. So let me introduce them. I'm joined today by three panelists, all veteran recruiters. First, I'd like to introduce JD Conway, who is a Senior Talent Acquisition Partner at BambooHR. JD is a seasoned recruiter who's worked both in-house and in boutique recruiting firms, as well as for the world's largest recruiting corporation focused on placements in Fortune 500 companies. He specializes in talent acquisition and high-growth SaaS companies. We also have Sean McHugh joining us. Sean is a Senior Manager of Talent Acquisition at Illumina, which is a genetic sequencing tech company. Sean's had many years of expertise in biotech recruitment, most recently with Illumina, and joined them in 2009 and has helped grow them from 1,000 to 5,500 employees. Jamie Hichens also joins us. Jamie is a senior recruiter at Glassdoor. Jamie has been recruiting in the Bay Area market for many years and has worked both independently and in-house. She's worked in tech, startups, ad agencies, staffing agencies, and she currently heads up marketing and creative recruiting for Glassdoor. So welcome, all three of you. All three of our panelists have had experience recruiting to scale a company and collectively have more than 35 years of experience between them. So I'm excited to start this conversation and hear from this panel of seasoned recruiters on recruitment best practices. So we will go through the questions that we have in our webinar, but we also want to hear from you, our audience. So please send your questions in throughout the webinar. We're going to try and leave time at the end for audience questions. So let's jump in. Let's begin with our first question. Jamie, I'm going to start with you. So tell us, what are your interview question best practices?
Thank you, Erica. I'm really excited to be here. So for me, the best way to establish a relationship with a candidate is to find out what really matters to them early on, essentially why they're even talking to me. So I ask questions like, what motivates and drives you? How do you measure success? What would your manager say about you? Why are you interested in this company, this role, and this opportunity? So I love uncovering someone's core values. It really helps me when it comes time to negotiating an offer.
Awesome, thank you. How about Sean? Do you have some best practice interview questions?
Sure. So, first off, when you look at best practices, I would say it's important to assign areas of focus for each interviewer. I think that a lot of times you have problems with redundancy in an interview where you may have too long of interview teams because it's not structured correctly. So I'd start off with that, and that you want to make sure that you're having smaller interview teams that are just diving deeper into fewer target areas, both technical and culturally. When I look at specific questions, one area I like to focus on is EQ, right? So it might be asking a question like, who inspires you and why? This will really demonstrate who they model themselves after. Another one would be, a question like, if priorities suddenly change, how do you inform your team and how do you focus on the changing goals? There you're kind of focusing on, flexibility, self-awareness, and seeing if they display empathy. It's important for us that people come into our organization with strong EQ.
Great. I love those two questions. And JD, what do you have to add?
Yeah, love being a part of this. By the way, just had to jump in there and say that I'm really passionate about these kinds of things. As it relates to actual interviewers and coaching them on best interview questions and best practices for that, I would say I often ask them, what are you really trying to find out with this question? I think we've all had this experience where I don't know about anybody else on the panel or anybody else in the audience here, but I feel like many people in the industry were just given a list of interview questions from somebody who mythically wrote them back in I don't know how many years ago. So to really dive down deep and understand what are you really trying to find out with this question. The second thing I would say is a key to good interviewing is follow-up questions. It's very easy for candidates to give planned responses. They'll Google all kinds of question responses out there. But to really dig deeper and ask follow-up questions, I think that is one of the major keys to a best practice for interviewing.
Great. I agree with you 100%. Those follow-up questions, and I think those open-ended questions, certainly with the follow-up questions, the tell me more or give me another example of, I think those work well. So great. We heard about kind of honing in on the candidate's values, like really trying to get to their values. We heard about structured interview questions and smaller teams. And we heard about really underlying purpose of the interview question. Don't ask interview questions just for the sake of asking the interview question. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to move to our next question. Sean, I'm going to start with you. So we all know that hiring managers inadvertently probably have some bad habits when it comes to evaluating candidates and interviewing candidates. So how do you help hiring managers unlearn their bad habits?
Sure. I mean, part of it is providing them tools and training, I think, at the front end of the process, right? So, they should understand and hopefully go through some sort of BBI or behavioral-based interview training. Another way would be partnering with them during an interview and then providing them feedback afterwards. Also, I think, a lot of it starts at the front end of the process. So if you're doing your intake meeting, is asking questions that will really get to the root of the type of questions they should be asking during the interview. So, I always ask some hiring managers, what will this person need to do in order to get 100% of their performance review? And if they can't answer that, they're not ready to start recruiting yet, right? But from that, you kind of get that theme, and then from there you build out requirements. And often what I've found is things that they're listing as requirements truly aren't requirements. And so you're really helping them understand how to build that out, and then you translate that into questions, right? So from there, once you've established and aligned on the true requirements of the role and the responsibilities, then it's a lot easier then to translate that into questions. So part of it's the training and walking them through, because we just can't assume they know how to do it.
Great. Thank you, Sean. We're also getting some audience feedback that we need you to either get closer to your speaker. I can't hear you quite as well as everyone else. For the next time I ask you a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Sean. Jamie, how do you help your hiring managers unlearn bad habits?
Yes, I agree with Sean. I think interview training is key. If you can put that on, it's a pretty important step. I've worked with hiring managers who haven't shown up to interviews, who cut candidates off during phone screens, who essentially were creating a negative employer brand. I've taken specific feedback from those candidates and shared it with the hiring managers as data points of why their behaviors were hurting our hard work, and you can't really argue with that. So I try to create a trusting relationship with hiring managers as soon as we start working on a rec together. And once I have that established, the rest is actually pretty easy. When they understand that I'm the expert they can rely on, they tend to agree with how I influence the hiring process, and then I can also, in turn, trust them to bring their A game.
Great. And JD, what insights do you have to share on how we help our hiring managers become more effective interviewers?
Yeah, I'd love to triple and double stamp both what Sean and Jamie said on these things. Being able to start early on, like Sean was talking about, is absolutely vital, making sure you're setting the tone early on with them to really understand the role, because many times they don't understand what they're actually hiring for, and you're wasting a lot of time and a lot of interview time, and a lot of interviews, poor candidates, by searching for the wrong thing. So not even opening the requisition until they really have it well defined, and doing that interview training beforehand. Also, that I think that goes part and parcel with what Jamie was talking about so well, about creating that relationship with people. When you have that relationship with your hiring managers, you're able to set the tone and help them examine themselves in their interviewing scenario. There's a lot of, I don't know about anybody else, but there's a ton of hiring managers out there that are like, well, I've been doing it for 10 years. Like, okay, I'm glad you've been interviewing for 10 years, but I know a lot of people that have been driving for 20 years and they're terrible at it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't room for improvement here. So really, it has to do with the fact that, roles for each hire are going to be different no matter how much interviewing has been done in the past for this team and this hiring manager. Roles are different. Team balances are different. Strengths and weaknesses are going to change over time. So you can set realistic expectations, kind of like what Sean was talking about, and make sure they're not looking for something that doesn't exist in the marketplace. They're as much as we like to talk about all these, we're great unicorn hunters. Well, ideally, we shouldn't have to be looking for unicorns because we're managing expectations out there. The last thing I would say is guiding hiring managers to a scorecard has helped a lot, because what it has done is help them be more objective rather than subjective in their interviewing practices. And so they have less bad habits and questions, and they tend to stray less when I'm actually helping them define the role with a scorecard earlier on. And that jumps back to what Sean was talking about as well. So just raving about their comments, that's all.
Yes. Yep. So it sounds like, getting structured, getting prepared, no one size fits all, that we have to have a strategy kind of for each role that we're hiring for, and that the relationship with the hiring manager is key, as well as tools, training, resources for your interviews. Is that fair to say, panelists?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right, JD, I'm going to start with you. Our next question, what different things do you look for as a recruiter in a phone interview versus a video interview versus in person?
Great. Well, this is something I think each of us could talk about in each particular aspect, phone, video, and in person, for quite some time. But what I would say is that in a phone interview, I want to make sure I'm always being aware of canned responses. Canned responses are everywhere, right? Like I mentioned earlier, people are very practiced at these things, so I'll continually ask follow-up questions to understand their motivations, as Sean and Jamie mentioned before. I can understand a lot about someone's motivations by what kinds of questions they're asking me. So that's what I usually do on my phone screens. That's what I usually look for, is what kind of questions they're asking me and how they're answering these follow-up questions beyond the stock answer. The video and in-person interviews, I would say the main thing that I recognize about video interviews, and I hope we all do, is that sometimes video interviewing is just weird. So it's difficult. It's hard for people to get used to, right? And so it's a newer thing in the market, so I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And if the position does not require a lot of in-person communication, I hire for developers all the time. You know what? They work well with their teams, but they don't need to be customer-facing. So benefit of the doubt, I don't even go near a video interview with those teams. Mm-hmm. So it all depends on the kind of candidate, the kinds of teams. The last thing I would say is that in the in-person interview, I look for someone who can take off the polish, somebody who can really get down and be real with me, to be quite honest. Forgive a little bit of my street talk here, but I'm just trying to understand who the person is, as Jamie mentioned before, what makes them tick and what their motivations are. So those are some of the things that I look for.
Great. Thank you. Sean, what about you? Do you do a lot of video and phone interview? Obviously phone, but video?
We we actually implemented HireVue, so I have a lot of experience with that over the last 12
Okay.
months. But if I start with phone, I think the first thing I try to focus on with phone is if they have the technical chops to do the job, right? Because the worst thing we can do is bring someone in and they can't even technically do the job. So I think we throw in a few of the cultural questions. There's some basic things you're going to get out of the way, like relo and comp, and we assess comp on the front end because, again, we don't want to waste anybody's time and go through the whole gamut. So we focus on, again, the relo, the comp, the immigration, but really focusing on mostly the technical fit at the front end of that call. For video, totally agree with you, JD. I think for us, you've noticed there's a lot of people that are just not comfortable with video. It's a newer thing, and so we try to really focus more on content versus kind of the interpersonal skills. The in-person, for me, a big focus is on cultural fit. And if they made it in-house, they can do the job. They've worked at blank company doing blank role for blank years. We typically know they can do the role. The bigger focus is, can they do the role here? Can they be successful at our company? And that's usually the biggest differentiator. And when we look back on, through the debriefs, if someone's not a fit, there's always a cultural reason why, right? So, again, it's a big focus on cultural fit on the in-person stage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Jamie.
So in any type of interview, I'm just trying to gauge fit, overall fit, and a connection. So phone interview it's true. You're really just assessing, are you qualified for this role? And like Sean said, we also assess comp on the front end as well before we get too far down the interview process. Agreed with both. Video is just awkward overall. I have not seen one go completely smooth. So as long as everyone understands that going in, that's great. And again, back to the phone interview that JD said, looking for canned responses, that's a pretty great thing to look out for. You hear a lot more of them than you sometimes think you would. So it's interesting to see how prepared people are or not, and how genuine they are. And then, I had a candidate one time who answered her phone screen that we had scheduled, and she said, "Oh, thanks, you woke me up from my nap, I'm ready." So that vetted that person out pretty quickly. Obviously not a prepared candidate who I was interested in moving forward with. And then in-person interviews, you're really testing everything. So you can do that, and that means their qualifications, their interests. Are they engaged? Are they really listening? How prepared are they? And you can pick up on things like their social cues, their tone of voice, posture, eye contact. Are they taking notes? Are they asking questions? So sometimes you think somebody's going to be amazing. You've had a great phone interview, you've had a great video interview. They come in and they bomb the in-person, which is why the in-person is such a crucial step.
Yeah. I'm curious, for all three of you actually, and Jamie, maybe you answer first, what percentage of our interviews at Glassdoor would you say we do video interviews?
I'd say about 25%.
25%. JD, what about you?
Really, given our roles, we actually use video interviews for probably close to 50% of our roles. Yeah.
50%. Okay. I'm just curious. And Sean, this is a little mini poll I'm doing.
Sure, we do it. We actually do it for every role outside of executive hires. So we've actually integrated HireVue as part of our process, where it actually takes the place of the hiring manager phone interview. So those questions that they would normally ask are populated into HireVue and asked, and we utilize it that way.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Great. So we heard a little bit about that in-person interview being so imperative to really getting to know your candidate, and certainly getting to know them on a more personal level and their authentic selves, and whether or not they are a fit for your company. So this is a good segue into our next question. So JD, I'm going to start with you. How does the focus on hiring for culture and culture fit sometimes or can inhibit, including for diversity? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's great to see when hiring managers have found their own subconscious or unconscious biases that accidentally gear them towards a particular candidate persona that seems to be arbitrary. I guess what I'm trying to get to here is that while there are many candidate personas that may lend itself to success on particular teams, when hiring managers, when you're able to partner with them to help them understand that the need for diversity of thought, I think natural diversity comes. You're looking for natural diversity and where, not where your company's culture is, but where it needs to go, I guess is what I would like to jump into, because there are too many places that will put people into a box too often. And you need to examine where your culture is and where it needs to go. And so that way you can talk it through with hiring managers and help them understand if we're able to find people that will help us go to the next level or change our culture to where it needs to be. I think diversity of thought naturally happens, and therefore natural diversity recruitment happens as well.
Yeah. Do you have any suggestions for our audience with respect to kind of how you sell that to your hiring managers? how to get them to kind of be a little more open-minded?
Yeah, I talk through their strengths and weaknesses on the team. One example that I've brought up and talked about recently is just a very simple thing for diversity of thought too is, sometimes people say, well, I need people to be able to do this, and so this candidate persona, I need outgoing people all the time. Well, hold on here. Why are you always looking for extroverts? Let's find some introverts that can lend some balance to the team. And we don't even need to peg them as an introvert. Let's just look at other personalities and examine what can bring your team success. As you examine a team's weaknesses, you can help hiring managers see how there are many possible solutions and not just one particular candidate they should be looking for, but many possible candidates that could bring their team added new strengths and help them see where that goes. Yeah, great. And Sean, what about you? How is it any different in biotech with respect to this focus on culture fit?
A lot of times it's the same. I think that, in one respect, you want to make sure at the front end of the process that you're ensuring a candidate slate and a candidate pool that is diverse. So, in terms of like companies like us have OFCCP regulations where we have to focus on a diverse candidate slate and how we do our outreach. So ensuring that your outreach is focused on, looking at STEM and other areas to drive that diverse candidate slate. I think the other part is really having the team, and it's not just a hiring manager, but helping them with self-awareness, because a lot of times hiring managers want to just hire someone like someone they already have, and then that creates a process to where everybody's the same and you lack diversity. So sometimes it's really just having the conversation with them and saying, hey, look in the room, you have five males, right? To really spark that focus in terms of looking at all candidates from all different backgrounds, et cetera. I think analytics too really help, right? So, if you see something and you see an underrepresentation, what are the analytics speak to it? Simply on LinkedIn Recruiter, you could pull analytics for a skill set and a geography, and you could look at some of that data. So I think there's various ways you can educate them on that. And so after you do the education, you really just focus on putting a diverse candidate slate in front of the manager, and then at the end of the day, hire the best candidate for the role. Yep.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned analytics, because I think for some hiring managers, like that speaks volumes for them, And Jamie, how about you?
Yeah, so they both answered that really well. So this is something we absolutely talk about at Glassdoor. This idea of culture fit is becoming outdated, and it is exclusive. There is an unconscious bias associated with it. So for me, it's about shifting a hiring manager's mindset so that they don't default to what they know, and helping them understand that a diverse workforce leads to more innovation, and that's what we all want. And it's really about people who are going to add to the cultural mix to enhance an organization. And that's what every hiring manager really wants at the end of the day. We just have to show them how to get there.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that too. I think that phrase culture fit is becoming kind of a no-no. And so going back to one of our earlier questions, it's getting your hiring managers to kind of unlearn that in particular even. So great answers. Thank you, guys. All right, let's move on to our next question. So, Sean, I'm going to start with you. So how do you mobilize your employee base for referrals? And talk a little bit about the value of referrals as well, please.
Sure, definitely. So we've done it in a few different ways. I think a lot of the research shows just throwing more money at it doesn't always bring more value. So you have to connect it back to the greater mission of the why, right? So, employees want to make sure that they work with better employees. It's going to be it's make the company more successful. So you want to drive the messaging back to the mission of whatever your mission is for your company and the impact it has for the employees. There's other things we've done as well. We've instead of just putting a monetary value, you can put things around campus. So it might be an iPad or Beats by Dre headphones. So they see this tangible object as a reminder of things that you can do. We've also focused on groups where it tends to be successful and use them as a poster child. So the sales organization, those folks are very numbers driven. So that's one area where they are excited to give it's a cash bonus for someone they refer. So we've done a lot with driving engagement with our sales folks through several means. One, through the global sales meetings. Another one is every month we have a large sales training where 150 employees come in and we educate on the referral program. And so utilizing them as the poster child is allowed for a lot of success in driving increased referrals, and that tends to bleed into other parts of the organization.
Great. And I love that idea about having kind of tangible, visible incentives around the office, get people motivated. JD, how about you with respect to referrals?
We have, I think we are very successful at utilizing referrals here at BambooHR, and I think one of the reasons is if you're focusing on three things as a recruiter, you're naturally going to get more referrals. Now we have a few other things that Sean mentioned and talked about as well. For instance, we have raffles. We call it the referral campaign. You may think it's kind of dorky, but it's hilarious actually. As we kind of make it a bigger and bigger deal where we raffle off experiences, not just a gift card or a cash bonus or anything like that, but we raffle off maybe a canoeing trip or something like that, or something else through Groupon or whatever. And so we teach and train and then encourage referrals through trying to get experiences. Just like what Sean talked about, though, teaching and training different teams for good referrals is vital. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is that you need to make sure you're integrating yourself into your teams the best you can. Some recruiters or HR folks might be remote and not be integrated with a particular team, but you have to do the best you can to integrate yourself into that team. That way they know JD or Jamie is the person to go to answer questions, and I know that they're going to take care of my referral. That leads me to that third point. You're going to get more referrals if you're taking care of the ones you already have. How often have you had the personal experience where you referred somebody to a former job and you never heard what happened? Really, recruiters and HR managers can do a much better job taking care of the referrals they already have and making sure that even if it's a no, the candidate is told, it's discussed with the employee as well, and they're thanked for it. It really just has to do with personal contact and communication on that, and you're going to get more referrals because they'll trust you with more of their referrals. Yeah,
great point. And Jamie, let's hear from you.
Well, you both have really great referral ideas, and I'm kind of jealous. And I think I need to implement some of those over here. We do referral bonuses, which is great. Cash is always nice. We love referrals here. Employees have already sold Glassdoor to their friends by the time they're sent to the recruiting team, so that's a win for us. And to piggyback on what JD said, taking referrals seriously and the person who referred them is crucial. That's how you get more. And that's how the recruiting team is taken seriously and seen as a partner. We follow up with every single employee who refers a candidate and every single person who was referred, whether they're a fit or not. And if they're not, we will give specific feedback back both to the employee and the referral as to why, but to keep us in mind for future opportunities that could be a better fit. So we're pretty specific in that regard. And just to piggyback the question above about including for diversity, it's important for us to hire referrals who aren't just going to be clones of their referrer. So they can be like-minded, but we don't necessarily need them to be the same version of their friend who's working there. Just something I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. So I think what I'm hearing is the candidate experience is always critical, but especially with referrals that I know here at Glassdoor, we provide a little transparency around, like you said, that feedback that we'll give to the candidate and to the referrer. Also, I heard that kind of integrating yourself as a recruiter into your teams so that they know that you are the expert, you're the go-to person. Using the existing team meetings to kind of educate and socialize and market the employee referral program. And I think that point about connecting it back to the greater mission, like everybody wants, the incentive is nice, but like really at the end of the day, why are we doing this is important. So great. Thanks to panelists.
Erica,
yes.
I'm sorry. Yeah, could I jump on that last point that you made just now?
Yes, please do.
Actually, something that I am glad we're revisiting what Sean said, because Sean, made an excellent point in that you're going back to the original mission and motivation of why you're getting and giving referrals. I've had many experiences where people have said, it turns out my last company had a $5,000 bonus, and when my buddy brought me into the company, I never saw him again after that. So it leads to a bad employee experience after that. This is something that there are other motivators that you need to point people to, and it's not always that cash bonus. So I just wanted to hit that again. So thanks for the interruption. Let me do that.
Oh yeah, I appreciate putting the point on that. I think it's very important. Okay, so we're going to move to this last kind of preset question, and then we'll eventually move into some audience questions. This question, how do you prevent bad interviewing experiences for candidates? And Sean, I'm going to start with you, and certainly if our panelists have any stories that they'd like to share, I'm sure our audience would love to hear it.
Well, I think, first off, I think it starts with surveying your candidates, right? So you need to create first a baseline to understand what do you do well and where's their opportunities. Because I think a lot of the bad experiences could be with managers or with interviewers or with the coordination aspect, but you need to hone in on where the opportunities are. So that would be the first thing. I think, one thing we learned through surveys is that interviewers are asking the same questions. And by the time they got to like the 8th person on the list, they were like, great, let me just say this again. And by the 8th person, they're like, yeah, they weren't too engaged. Well, that's because you're the 8th person that asked the same questions for 45 minutes. So one thing we did is we created what we called an interview planner, which aligns everybody in the interviewer with a few technical or skill-focused areas and then a few culture areas. And we make sure not to double up more than twice. And then we keep our interview teams fairly small. So 4 to 6 people only for most interviewers. Only executives would be 8. So smaller interview teams with very directed areas. So that way, when you come into the debrief, you're focused on each interviewer going deep in just a few areas, and then it's really the accumulation of all of that which drives, whether you're going to go or no go. So I think that's part of it. I think that making sure people show up on time, right, or changes last minute, that happens far too often. So what we try to do is we kind of track the problem interviewers, and those folks we pair up. So we don't have them interview by themselves. So if they show up late or don't show up, at least someone's there in the interview. Mm-hmm. We've also learned to schedule at least 45 minutes per interviewer. I think 30 minutes just isn't long enough. We also provide everybody a welcome folder, right, that includes things like their interview schedule, especially if there was last-minute changes there. When Sally comes in, they're not expecting Billy, for example. Benefits overview, company overview. I think part of our feedback was, you didn't go over benefits enough. So we give them a detailed benefits summary. And then lastly, I think is follow-up. We always get slammed on our candidate feedback in terms of how quick we get back to candidates. So ensuring that you're measuring it and you're driving that back as a goal for the recruiters in terms of that candidate feedback and time to give feedback for us is really big.
Great. And so I'm inferring that after every on-site interview, it sounds like, you send out a candidate survey?
Correct. Anybody that interviews on-site gets a survey.
Yeah. And then how many questions is that? I'm just curious.
I think it's like 8 questions.
8 questions. Okay. Great. And then you're feeding back that data to the hiring managers and using that to kind of inform how you structure your interview, who you're picking to interview even, it sounds like, and how you're structuring your interviews.
That, right? I mean,
yeah.
it provides feedback. Then it provides feedback kind of holistically across our talent acquisition team from a programmatic perspective on things that we need to change.
Yes.
So it's both specific to the hiring manager, but then you also see themes, right? And so the theme areas are things you definitely have to jump on.
Yeah. And that interview planner, that pregame that you're doing, is that something you're doing in person, on the phone, or is it kind of electronic?
When we do our intake meeting with the hiring manager, we sit down and you could think about it, it's an Adobe form, but it really started with an Excel spreadsheet. So on the left columns, you work with them to say what are, after you qualify that role and you ask all those right questions and you understand those true requirements, you list those on one column and you write up the interview team at the top and you just check who's doing what. And then the values and the culture is the same, right? So you just assign those across the team, but that's done at the actual front end of the intake meeting because, again, you're creating that alignment up front. And then once an interview a request is to be scheduled, the hiring manager is required to send that out to the interview team, copying our coordinator. So that way they're utilizing that as a scheduling tool as well, but it also forces the manager to create that engagement with their hiring team. So at that point, if someone doesn't want to interview or is not aligned to this, they can opt out or ask any questions prior to the actual interview.
Yeah. Great. I think that's a great tip. Okay, Jamie, let's hear from you on bad interviewing experiences.
Yeah, so I've seen plenty of interviews go wrong. Pre-Glassdoor, I had a situation a few years ago where we flew a candidate out from the East Coast to San Francisco. Half the interviewers didn't show up. One who did had no idea what this person was interviewing for. It was essentially a series of disasters and just a horrible candidate experience. So because of that, I now schedule a pre-interview briefing with the entire interviewing team so we all get on the same page before this person even comes in. So we talk about why this is an important hire. We talk about who the candidate is. We go through the resume, the LinkedIn profile. We talk about what each interviewer should be testing for, and we assign them specific questions that they should ask during the interview. So there's no crossover of everyone asking the candidate the same questions over and over, and you actually get a good idea overall of who this candidate is and if they're qualified. And then we hold a debrief after the interview where every interviewer gives feedback. They also should have already submitted an evaluation through our ATS, but we go through all of the feedback and talk about why we're hiring this person or not. So there's less ambiguity around that, and everyone can agree or not agree. But that's really crucial. And we are also talking about doing what Sean mentioned, sending out that post-interview survey to candidates. I think that's so crucial. And again, really good data points to share.
Yeah,
for
sure. JD, tell us what you're doing at BambooHR.
Man, we're doing a lot on candidate experience here. I'll say that. As far as the story that you mentioned, there's something that I particularly experienced myself as an interviewee many years back, where the interviewers had forgotten I was there. I was sitting in a conference room, and I was there for a good 45 minutes waiting, and I'm not a timid personality, and nor do I think I'm obnoxious enough not to be very forgetful, I thought. So those kinds of things happen. I'm pretty sure Sean and Jamie would be able to look back at their years and see, just people not showing up, like we mentioned before. Those things, although even if you've had those experiences in the past, what you can do is manage logistics very well. I think the theme that Sean, Jamie, and I are getting to is communication, right? Communication is the key. So in our ATS, we have a great collaboration tool where everybody's able to put down very easily in kind of a posting format what was discussed in their step of the interview, what their next step is, so that way you aren't repeating questions like we're both mentioned. The other thing is, so other than logistics, I feel like what everyone can do is every recruiter, every HR person, whether through email or over the phone or any other method of communication that happens to work for them, they can manage expectations and help people know what the rest of the process will look like, what they should expect in these steps and processes, who they'll be meeting with likely and why and whatnot. One of the things we do to help people get a feel for the company and have a good candidate experience is we give every person who comes in for an in-person interview a tour, and that allows them to meet different members of different teams to see how their piece of this position fits into the whole. And I'll be honest, I will often stop and I won't completely walk away, but I'll stop and have them talk to current employees at other departments and have them talk about how the role they're interviewing for, have the employee talk about how their position is connected to the role they're interviewing for. This helps people, it's like a pre-onboarding. It establishes good relationships up front. And that way when they're brought in, they have a few other points of contact rather than just the person they interviewed with or their future manager. And the last thing, which has been mentioned before, I don't want to belabor it too much, but it's this training to hiring managers. All recruiters, all HR professionals have to take time to train hiring managers and work well with them truly as a partner. Help them with the scorecarding. Take time to become expert yourself. Maybe you're a little bit more junior in your career. Take time to do the research you need to become expert at this. And understand that good interviewing is an evolutionary process. It's something that you continue to get better at. You can continue to tweak and improve upon. And you're going to be able to help managers really get a holistic view at all of the candidates and have a very good candidate experience when people know they're being evaluated well and fairly. That you can just people can tell when an interview is just kind of made up on the spot or they're asking those stock questions rather than people being assessed holistically there. So I guess, again, those three things as a recap: logistics, managing expectations and communicating those, and training the hiring managers will help people have a better interviewing experience. And I think all of us could come up with a million bad interviewing experiences because unfortunately they're way too common out there. But yeah, that's why I'm grateful for webinars like this that'll help us get some new ideas and bring other value there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jamie, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah.
Giving me the look.
to talk about what JD was saying about the tour part, I actually do the same thing. We do the same thing here. I personally give all my candidates tours. I like to have that kind of 15 minutes where it's a little more of a casual conversation and I'm showing them the entire company. They can see if people actually look happy working here, which I think is really important. I know for me, when I interview at a company, I look around and really read the room and see if people are genuinely look happy at their desks. And I also like to show them where they might be sitting if they worked here. I think having that visualization is really important. And to JD's third point also, it's true. Interviewing is a privilege, and I know not every interviewer feels that way, but it really is. And to show them that they get to influence who makes up the company is a pretty incredible role. So I think it's really important to have them see it that way.
Great. Awesome. So before we kind of move into audience questions, do any of our panelists have some kind of additional thoughts that they want to offer on anything that we've talked about so far? No. Okay. We're going to get into audience questions. JD, I think you want to mention around this.
Yes, would love to. In fact, I do want to save plenty of time for those, or as much time as we can for those audience questions, but want to invite everybody on the webinar here to follow us on social media and our blogs at BambooHR.com. Our blog and Glassdoor's blog as well for more content like this. I've actually, before I came to Bamboo, I've been following Glassdoor's content for quite some time. Also, we're doing our very first user conference here at BambooHR. We're really excited to work with great people like you, and we're excited to invite you to BambooHR's Elevate Summit and User Conference. So go ahead and take a look at that when you get a chance as you follow us on social media. And I'll stop talking so we can get some more questions here.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So we have a lot of audience questions, and I can tell you that we're not going to be able to get through all of them. We have tons, which is awesome. Thank you, audience. So our first question, I'm going to ask Sean to respond first. So this first question asks, how do you handle when you have 3 hiring managers for one role who each want different things for the same role?
So 3 hiring managers who have a similar role, but they want 3 different things. Is that correct? Is that what they're asking?
That's how it's reading.
Well, I think that first validate that their assumptions are correct, right? So I think at the front end during that intake meeting, validate that they are different. I mean, if I use that similar to Illumina, we might have 3 scientist roles, and we might need 3 different types of scientists, right? And so if that's the case, then it's truly building up 3 different strategies based on the differences in the role, but also I would look at opportunities to cross-recruit, right? So I think if there's any themes of cross-recruiting, then great. So we've had times where we've been able to recruit off a single position to fill 3 different positions if they're slightly different, but sometimes there is enough difference in the roles where you really need 3 different distinct strategies for how you're going to fill them. So it's very situational, but it starts with the intake meeting and that front-end alignment to understand what truly are the requirements and are they truly different.
Great. Thank you. And I'm going to probably round robin these audience questions just so we can get to as many of them as possible. This next one is for JD. We got a ton of questions asking about this, JD. Can you expand on the concept of a scorecard?
Yes. I think the best thing I could do for those of you asking the questions is pointing you to some excellent resources. As you look at, there's a book that really influenced me many years back called the Who book that talks about scorecarding by Jeff Smart and Randy Street. Also, Lou Adler has some great content on these, on how to build a scorecard. Really, with scorecard, it's about the same problem that Sean was addressing there. It's helping interviewers all get on the same page. When you talk about objectives, what is the objective of the position? What really do they need to achieve? And then get granular with that. Ask the deeper questions, and then say, okay, now what questions are going to help us get to this point? It's really about reverse mapping everything. So that way you're asking the right questions, everybody knows why these questions are all asked, and then you have continuity with those scorecards. In fact, I had a similar experience recently where when I first started at Bamboo, we had 3 dev managers, and they each had things that were very important to them, and they all got on the same page. We just needed to chat about what was really important, have several meetings about it. It is an evolutionary process to kind of really understand, okay, we're all on the same page in what we're looking for here now. And it's, like I said, it's an evolutionary process to do that. So with those scorecards, I would point you to some other research so that way I could ramble about this another hour or so, but I'll just point you to that and say that actually helps us really direct ourselves when we're looking at the objective, the position, and getting detailed on that.
Great, thank you. And JD, when you create the criteria for the candidate scorecard, is that happening at the point that the role is being defined, or is that happening in the intake strategy session? Like, when is that happening?
Yes, in fact, it's well beforehand. We all know that there are positions that are consistent, that are not necessarily new or newly conceived positions. Those ones should be happening as soon as you're able to, because those are consistent ones. Maybe you have more backfill problems there. Other new positions, we make sure to take time well in advance before we open anything to do that in that intake meeting. It takes several iterations to really dive down into the scorecard and make sure we're all feeling it right. Yeah,
great. Okay, our next audience question. Jamie, this one I'm going to give to you. So when you as a recruiter are new to a company, how do you assess cultural fit when you yourself have not yet completely figured out what the culture really is.
This is so important as a recruiter because we're the ones selling culture. So it's a great question. It does take a little time. I remember in my first few phone screens here at Glassdoor talking to candidates, they wanted to know about the culture here, and I was trying to explain it, but I still was figuring it out myself. So what I like to do is I like to meet with as many different people in different groups in a company as I can. I don't want to just know what the people on my team think or how they are a fit in this company. I want to know how everybody kind of fits together. So I will start by eating lunch with my teammates and getting to know them. I will naturally meet with hiring managers to talk about recs, but also get to know them and why they chose to be at this company and what they love most about it. I will figure out who other people in different departments are and ask them to grab coffee or go for a walk. It's important to get different opinions from different groups and different people. You really have to put yourself out there, but as recruiters, we tend to have to do that anyway, so it's not as difficult maybe for us to do that. But it's really, really important. And I think it does take a little time. I remember probably it took me about a month or two till I could confidently answer candidates on my phone screens what the culture here was really like.
Yeah. So initially you're saying you kind of channeled everything that everyone was telling you and represented that.
Yes, exactly.
You actually kind of felt it yourself.
Exactly. I remember saying, so far I love it. I think it's great. Still figuring it out.
Awesome. Okay. This next question, Sean. This question is asking, do you give candidates feedback regarding their interview when it's requested by the candidate? Second part, if it comes down to fit, they're not a fit for the job, how do you give that feedback?
That's a great question. So yes, we give all candidates that make it through in person get a phone call from our recruiters that give them feedback. And I think you have to be delicate, right? There's some legal reasons and things you can say, and it's tough because how do you tell someone they're not a cultural fit, right? So I think some of it is direct and some of it's indirect, right? I think that if there's areas where there's opportunities for growth for the person, I think it's great to give them that fit, right? Especially I focus on areas where you have two candidates and one person was selected over the other. Focus on the gaps for that person, right? We were looking for someone who had more experience leading project core teams, or the other person we were looking at had a greater strength in this technical area, right? Because what they'll do is if you throw something out, they can argue about. A lot of times they'll argue about it, but if there's definite areas of gaps technically, that's a great place to start.
Yep. I think that's great. And I think, too, you as a recruiter know that candidate to some degree, so you probably have a sense in terms of like how direct feedback might sit with them versus something a little more gentle. So probably customizing, what you're offering to them is important.
Definitely.
Okay. Moving on to our next question. Jamie, this one I'm going to ask you. This audience member is asking, they're interested to know how each of the panelists, so actually let's each answer this, each of the panelists approach compensation on the phone. Sometimes it can get awkward. What are your best practices for approaching the subject? And do you have a go-to statement that you use?
I do. We do bring up comp on the earlier side here. We don't, like I mentioned earlier, don't want to get too far down the line where we're close to negotiation time, we haven't brought it up. So I do tend to bring it up pretty early. I've only had pushback a few times. The way I phrase bringing it up is we have the whole phone interview and make sure it's a fit to that point, and then I tell them about our perks and comp package, what overall we offer, and then I let them know that we do bring up comp on the earlier side to make sure we're on the same page. And I ask them if they're comfortable sharing what they might be targeting in their next role, so whether that's total package or ballpark. Typically what I get is they want to share with me where they currently are, what they're making, their whole package, and what they'd be targeting. I've only, honestly, surprisingly to me too, had maybe 5 people not want to share that information up front, and that's totally fine. If that's the case, I just let them know that it's something that I will want to bring up before we start getting pretty deep into the in-persons and all that.
Great. JD, do you have some other tips to add?
Yeah, actually, very similar to Jamie's process in the fact that I think transparency earlier on really breeds more transparency from the other end. When you're bringing up compensation, I'll often just say, hey, I want to make sure we're doing the right thing by you and not wasting your time, because that really is the motivation. Is that we don't want to waste candidates' time. It prevents us from finding other people that may be the right fit at the right compensation areas. And that I will try to clear the air and say, listen, my company is not the kind of company that will try to price gouge anyone. We're not trying to take advantage of anyone. So I never ask, what they're currently making. Again, like Jamie mentioned, I will just say, what kinds of things are you looking for? Like, what's important to you on compensation, and can you give me a ballpark or a range that I could look into, and we could continue down the road if it makes sense for us. And to help them know that doesn't sink the ship forever. If they're outside of a compensation range, okay, I'll tell you what, we can talk about that in future when we have a role that is a little bit closer to that. It's about keeping the relationship going, and that compensation call is not going to burn bridges if they say the wrong number or something like that.
Yep, great point. And Sean, any other perspective to offer?
Similar themes. I think it's about being transparent and being direct. I think for us, we're pretty straightforward of saying, similar to the phone interview process they both discussed, is at the end of the call asking them about comp. But we're fairly direct of asking everybody, what is your current compensation package? So we'll ask them, what's your salary, what's your target bonus, what's your equity, what do you have, what did you vest last year, so we can understand total comp. But we will explain the whys behind it, right? So when we talk to them, we also explain our comp philosophy. So we'll be transparent as well. So it's a sharing of information and building that trust of, here our comp philosophy has 3 prongs going into salary, bonus, equity. They don't know what RSUs are, explaining how those work, explaining that, hey, it's rare when someone doesn't give it to you. It's 1 out of 10 maybe that won't give you their comp data, and that's probably even, it's probably 1 in 30 or 40. And what we explain too is if you're low in the range, it's not going to impact what we're going to pay you, right? It's more of understanding, because if you're too high, then let's have the conversation before we get in-house. So we typically gather all that data up front, and we typically don't have that much pushback and issues from candidates providing it.
Great. Thank you, panelists. Okay, we actually have time for just one more question. So Jamie, I'm going to start with you again. This question, do any of you panelists have one go-to interview question that you feel tells you the most about the person?
I think there are a few. The one I would definitely say, and I think I mentioned this at the beginning, was I like asking them what matters or what's most important to them in their next move. So what about a company are they looking for? What about a team is going to make them join? What about a role is going to really excite them enough to leave where they currently are? That really gets into the fact of why they're even looking. What's going on in their current situation that they're open to leaving? So if we can provide something that they're not currently getting, that's usually where we're going to find a great connection.
Great. Sean, your go-to question?
100% agree. It's really about focusing on motivation, right? What's their motivation for looking, and what's the motivation for our company? So a lot of people, why you're looking to leave, but then why Illumina? What do you feel that Illumina is going to give you you're not getting now, right? And because I want to make sure that both ends, it's a two-way street here, that we are providing them what they need, right? And for what they're looking for as they continue to grow. And then, but it also allows you to utilize that through the process to focus on from as a way to engage them in the opportunity.
Great. And JD, we're going to leave you get to answer this last question.
Whoa. Okay. A lot of pressure. No. Actually, I'm not as. I usually don't have silver bullet kinds of questions. I look at people very holistically and try to understand. Now, there are many of these questions absolutely to understand their motivation and have a real conversation with them on that. One of the things that I would say is that, or I often ask, is that I'll jump into common frustrations they've had, because I don't want, I'm very open and transparent about our company's weaknesses too, because every company has them. So I will say, what kind common frustrations have you had in your tenure over the years? What kinds of things that are difficult for you? Because I don't want to bring you into a situation where you would have the same problem. You'd have the same situation, and we'd all be frustrated 6 months from now. So I help them see kind of the big picture, ask them more about the frustration, so that way I can understand a little bit more about their motivations, as Jamie and Sean mentioned.
Great.
All right, and so it looks like we are at the top of the hour, so I did want to give a personal thank you to everyone for joining us today. We know it's hard to take an hour out of your day, so appreciate you tuning in, and special thank you to Erica, Jamie, JD, and Sean for sharing all of your wonderful insight with us. I think I can speak for everyone on the line when I say I learned a whole bunch today. So as JD mentioned, here on the slide you can see BambooHR's blog, as well as social handles and accounts, as well as Glassdoor's employer site, where you can find a whole bunch of other helpful resources. So again, thank you everybody, and with that we'll let you go and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.